let's give the people what they came for. They're like, you blowhard, who is this guy? But yeah, welcome everyone. I'm I'm Ishmael Hodges. People who've listened to my other interviews maybe are pretty used to that. I tend to start and we end up kind of rolling into some nonsense or another. But I'm super excited today to be talking to Tim Sarek. Always feels weird when I say Tim. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Is it Sarek? I never even asked you that.
Look, I'm a half Turkish, as you know,
I'm gonna
but
say
I
it's not a
can't really
German last name.
pronounce my own word and my own name. So I think correctly it would be Serek.
Sarek?
Rolled R. Yeah, right.
Like a flip on the R, Sarek?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah,
But
because
my dad just said Seirek, so very German, and so that's what I went for.
oh, okay. So
Sarek
when
is
you
also totally fine.
okay, so on your day to day though, if you're talking to people in German, you say Zidek.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. We're here to talk about cognitive offloading.
All great podcasts. All great
Yeah.
podcasts. I like that. So that's all right.
We're here to hang out, right? There's a reason. There's a reason why every single one of these things that I post, it's called a chat with so and so, and in this case,
I like that more. So that's all right.
yeah, yeah. Tim Zyrek. Have to do extra angry sounding to
I do like
perpetuate
the English pronunciation, to be honest, of that name. I don't know why.
But yes, I'm joined today by Tim Sarek. It's the offloaded cognition thing. I think we talked a while back, and I'd mentioned about wanting to discuss it with you.
Yeah.
And so I know it's not necessarily. Well, I'll kick it over to you because I was just sort of trying to brush up on it again, and I was looking at your article, which for people who follow me, if you go into my notes stream, right before this started, I posted the article that Tim and I are going to be sort of referencing here today. It's called "The Socially Attuned Mind: How Cognition Extends into the Social Environment." And it's a really fascinating article, and I believe you mentioned in the article that this is it still the case that this is going to be sort of the substance of what your bachelor's thesis is going to be ultimately?
I already finished that.
Did you finish it? Oh, okay.
1 year ago, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not really well researched. Still not. I don't think my professor actually worked on that further. I'm not sure. I don't know why. I think it's fascinating. But there's still a lot to be done. So, for example, the EEG experiment, maybe we'll talk about that. That's something that nobody has done yet. And I don't know if somebody will. I hope so.
Do you know what the can you expand on well, maybe we should back up a little bit because I just looked at it, so I have some of it fresh in my head. So I know the part that I've sort of referenced, the cognitive offloading, is sort of maybe just a piece of it. Do you want to sort of lay a basic background for what we're talking about real quick, and I'll shut up and let you do that.
Sure. So we have that the basic idea is cognitive offloading. That extends back to the extended mind theory by Chalmers and Andy Clark, I think. And the idea is basically you can use objects, but also other people in your environment as a repository for information. And you can, for example, write something down on a notebook, and that would be something like offloading that information. So I think Chalmers uses the experiment of an Alzheimer patient who has lost his memory. So he just writes it down on a notebook. And for him, because it functions the same way his memory would, it's always available, it's reliable, and so on. It functions like an extended mind, so to say. And so the idea is that you can offload the cognitive load you would usually have with that information onto things and other people. So that's the basic idea.
Okay. It's such a cool concept, and there's like so much to sort of press on there. Yeah, it's almost difficult to know where to begin because I have a place I would like to, once we sort of establish it, I have a place I'd like to sort of end up and get your thoughts on it. But you mentioned about the notebook. So I think that's it's an easy example, and that's maybe a really simple example. What are some other examples of this? And then also the other thing where I think it gets particularly interesting is because when we're talking about something like a notebook, it's like, oh, I jotted some notes down to remember, so that's something that's in my brain, but I've now offloaded it in a way where, it might be, because memory is not perfect. So this might actually be superior in a way to just holding it in your head. That, in terms of principle, I think is pretty straightforward, pretty easy to get on board with. But when it comes to using other people, and then also this concept, or not even concept, sometimes it's the simplest words that I struggle to come up with. Mirror neurons.
Me too.
Mirror neurons. This the basic idea of what's been shown in testing, I believe now in humans and also in apes, and maybe I'll try to lay out my sort of layman understanding of it.
Sure.
The idea that we and possibly other species, and it seems particularly maybe social species, will be watching another member of the species engage in a certain activity. And if it seemed to me that this was a condition, that if that member of the species had done a similar action before, the associated neurons would essentially light up. So it's like their brain would light up as if they were doing the task.
That's right, yeah.
But they were only seeing another member of the species doing the task, and they weren't actually doing it. And I feel like that might that's interesting unto itself. But I feel like when we start to maybe get into what I think at least are the much more sort of fascinating and interesting aspects of this cognitive offloading thing, I think that becomes really important, and maybe is where sort of the quote unquote like the sauce is at. So how does that sort of work? Maybe in a bit more of a full description than what I just gave for it.
Yeah. So that was actually totally precise. So mirror neurons are the idea that those are neurons or groups of neurons that are active when you are doing something. An action, for example, you are picking up something. And when you see somebody else or someone else, maybe an animal even, do it, then the same neurons will be active. That is what we call mirror neurons. And as you said, animals have that too. And there were already theories that is connected to empathy in some way, but I don't think that has been proven yet. It's more of a learning thing, because in small children, for example, it's not that developed. And so you have to learn it, as you said. It's not a thing that is just genetically given, that you just mirror what somebody else does. It's what you do in order to learn that movement, right? Because it's very useful to try to activate already the same neurons you would also activate. And so it's more of a learning movements and actions thing. But it's also, of course, incredibly important for social conversations and interactions, and maybe even social cognition. So trying to understand what somebody else is doing and why, that's very important for that too.
Do you know, because this is the next question from some of the other things I've done in my life, certain techniques I've seen that have been sort of touted and seem to work. This whole concept of visualization. I've seen it for sport. I've seen it for stuff with music, and is there a very similar thing happening when, say, someone who's I say professional, I guess they wouldn't have to be a professional, but someone's about to do a task and they're sitting there, and you'll sometimes see people in certain for certain activities do it. You'll see them over to the side, and they might not be going through maybe physically the whole like the shadow boxing or something along the. Well, shadow boxing is a bit more. Maybe that would be to the extreme end of like they are physically, you know what I mean? They're going through motions, but they're not actually responding to an actual opponent. But they are visualizing as they're doing. It's not one or the other. They're not just randomly throwing punches. A lot of times in shadow boxing, they're imagining, okay, I'm doing this combination. He throws a right cross, and then I slip. So you would make the argument there, I guess, that there's some genuine neuronal activity from actual movements. But it seems like as well for even certain types of visualization where you have no actual sort of movement pantomiming going, that, and if I remember, I feel like there's been some research done on it, that there are advantages even to sort of, would it still qualify as mirror neurons if essentially the image that's stimulating the mirror neuron potentially activation is only within the mind, as opposed to, so like if I imagine myself, like someone say who's in who does karate, and um they're about to do a competition, and they're sitting there and they're just thinking through the steps of their kata that they're about to do. Well, they might be
Mhm.
imagining, literally visualizing themselves in their mind actually going through
Yeah.
this kata. Is it also essentially mirror neurons that are activating even through pure visualization? Is it the same sort of a system? And
Yeah.
then, as a follow-up question, would you happen to know, or do you think it would be an interesting question to actually measure the effectiveness of pure visualization versus seeing an actual,
Mhm.
and if there's a difference in effectiveness?
That's a very good question. I do actually think that the research on mirror neurons emerged from that research on learning and predictive processing. So it's definitely very similar. And it's true that also when we learn something and when we imagine a movement, that's already part of that learning. And it's also true that the same activity can be seen while you imagine a movement. So it's a similar system, yeah. And what was the next question again?
Um, whether you knew if there'd been any research, or just sort of based on
Yeah.
what, yeah, to
Yeah.
compare maybe the two, of like, okay, if I watch someone else, like where we know it's a mirror neuron thing, say I watch another person do the kata that I'm about to perform, and the activation that happens, is it the same, or is it somehow different than if I were to simply imagine the kata being
Yeah.
performed?
I mean, probably. I'm not an expert on this topic, to be honest, on mirror
Mhm.
neurons, but it would make sense to me if there was some research on this. I know that there's research on both mirror neurons and learning through going through the movement. And I think there's even evidence that it helps just imagining stuff for movement. I think they did that with some athletes, I'm not sure, in one study, and it actually had a significant effect. And so it's definitely both part of the same learning system of predictive processing, I would
Mhm.
say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that I feel we've sort of set out the basic idea of mirror neurons, when it comes to cognitive offloading, we kind of talked about it in the context of learning.
Hmm.
How do you see the two sort of beginning to interface? Say, if you look at something like a sports team, and I think some of these other, maybe, I don't know if edge case is really the right word, but where this idea of cognitive offloading, I think you can see it really sort of come into full fruition. How do you see these things sort of melding together?
I think the mirror neuron concept is just a very important introduction to that research on how other people really influences us. And it's, I think, part of the argument that can be made that other people can be seen as functionally part of one cognitive system. And so it could also be a functional or anatomic basis for the idea of how social offloading might work. So it could be that similar neurons could be activated because for social offloading to work, which we'll maybe talk about later, you of course have to know what the other person is doing, if and what the actual task is. And
Mm,
so if you can really reliable predict what the other person is doing, then you can also tune yourself to that person. You can offload information to that person, maybe even attentional resources. And so I think in that case, they are both connected. Maybe we can do a bit more neuroscience based research through these mirror neurons on social offloading. I've also had the theory that maybe even like conditions like autism, where there's a
mm,
bit more problems with trying to understand what other people are doing, that could
hmm
interfere with social offloading because you simply can't really know if the other person is reliable or what the person is really doing. So then we would have the basis for that. So how it exactly works. Although I think there's research that autism actually does not have any difference in mirror neurons or makes
mm.
any difference. But it's still a very interesting question, I think, for social offloading.
Yeah, that's funny because that literally popped into my head, where I was like, okay, so if there is something biological going on with the mirror neurons thing,
Yeah.
what would it look like if there was some, because ostensibly this is, it's not a, neurons are a physical thing unless you're
Mm.
sort of Donald Hoffman. You know,
Or Ben.
yeah, yeah. They're not there when you're not looking. What do you
Yeah.
mean? I don't like that. No, but yeah. So like it's a to keep it in kind of normal language, it's a physical thing. It's a physical system, and so theoretically any physical system could have problems, and if it is a physical system, it would be influenced, possibly influenced by genetics. And that was
Yeah.
a thought that came to my mind. I was like, so what would happen if there was something wrong with that? And my next thought was, oh, I wonder if that could be what's going on with autism. So I think,
Mhm.
even if it's not, I think it's a reasonable question to ask. And I think that and I'm just sort of following the, I know it's cringy, but whatever. I say it so often now. I'm just going to keep. Maybe it's the thing. I was kind of following the rabbit in my head, where it's like it's fascinating because there is a physical system at play that we're able to look
Mhm.
at in terms of activity.
Yeah.
But then on another level, it does seem like it's interfacing with something that is incredibly non-physical, which
Mhm.
is things like and this is where I think it does quickly intersect more with philosophy, theory of mind, things like this. Because
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that's all well and good. You can have this system, but it seems to be based in a presumption of like a fundamentally sort of anti-solipsistic presumption that what's going on with other people is either the same or akin to what's going on with me.
Yeah, it really depends on your view, on your metaphysical view. So the extended mind theory is dependent on being a functionalist. So functionalism, otherwise it doesn't work, right? Because if you're just using the brain and you say the brain is the mind, then there is nothing to be attuned or to be
Mhm.
offloaded. It's just a process in the brain, and you don't process something because you wrote it down, but it's not connected in any way. But if you have more like an information first or maybe even mind first theory, then of course it's a bit different, right? Because then everything is, so to say, a mentation, a process where information is just bundled at one place. And of course, there can then also be a connection between different places of information, maybe. And yeah, that's really interesting. But maybe we can go on social offloading first, and then we can look at the implications of that.
Mhm.
Um, should I just maybe go through maybe an
No, yeah.
experiment?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
what
dive in.
what has been done with social offloading? I think I'll just give the gist of the experiment. What was done? So the participants saw a picture, and on top of the picture was a word, so superimposed on it. And for example, the task could be just concentrate on the picture and then press left if it's, let's say, edible, and press right if it's non edible, if it portrays something edible or non edible. And the word on top could interfere with that, right? So, for example, you could see the picture of a carrot, and on top you can see the word car. So then you would be a bit slower because it interferes with that. That's what we call an compatibility effect. And what the I think Miles Tuff was it in I don't know, UCL, I think, found that when you think a partner takes over that word, even if the task doesn't change at all, you are faster because somehow you can down regulate that representation of the distractor in some way. So that's the basic finding. You're simply a bit faster. But still it's a bit weird because of course the task doesn't change. So there's no reason why it suddenly shouldn't impact you in some way. So I think that's a really interesting aspect about these experiments. And that's also what we call social offloading. It's then a bit more, you can apply it onto more broad things, but that's the experimental basis of it.
That's what's so cool with these things, because you just laid that out. But then it seems like if you just sit with that for a second, you can see where potentially, and obviously that would then be, the seed of that experiment would be then to lead on to say, okay, what are the ramifications of this? How far does this extend? How powerful is it? But man, you can see where for a species like ourselves, where that could turn into a sort of superpower in a
Yeah,
way.
sure. It's a huge survival advantage you can imagine. So when we are hunting and gathering, that's of course a huge advantage to be able to concentrate on your task and just not think about a distractor, maybe a different task another person is doing. So yeah, it's a huge advantage, and it shows, I think, how much we are really influenced by the social environment. We are really just so socially attuned to the world around us.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Speaking about a survival advantage, I've got trying to think of the best way. And I'm not trying to be clear to people too. I'm not trying to paint some like secret squirrel kind of like bullshit mystical thing like I'm some sort of badass. But I've done a good bit of training when it comes to firearms, tactics, all these kind of things. I was sort of involved in that world for a good while. And if anyone has seen just movies, things like this in general, I think most people are familiar with the idea of like a SWAT stack, um, or now I'm annoyed with myself because I can't remember what I know the type of the group in like France that does a lot of that is like GIGN. But you see it as well for special forces and as well even Marines, things like this. The idea of room clearing. So if you have a military unit or a specialized police unit that's going to be going into clearing a house,
Hmm.
usually you'll have, they call it a stack. And if you've seen it in movies where you have the guys line up outside of a door, and they'll have, each guy will have a hand on the guy in front of them. They're stacked up to breach a room, and the guy who's first to the door is called the point man, typically. And if you've looked into this kind of stuff at all, when a room is breached and you have a group of whatever you want to call them, operators for the purpose of
Hmm.
this conversation, that then make entry into the room, they do what's called cutting the pie,
Hmm.
which is as you essentially clear the door jam and then make entry into the room. Each guy in that stack, essentially based, and there's a lot that goes into it. I won't get into all that, but it depends on whether it's a corner fed room, and by feeding it means where's the door? Where, are you in a hallway? Are you coming from one room into another room? There's all kinds of things that go into it. But as the person makes entry into the room, cutting the pie means that that first guy through, he is responsible for a certain slice of that room.
Hmm.
So when you break through the door, if the guy comes through and every person in the context of what we're talking about, if you just take that individual and you say, okay, four guys are about to go into this room and there's likely or maybe someone with a gun in here who might shoot us. If you're just taking that individual person, there is going to be no essentially force multiplier effect. And the other thing
Hmm.
is, it's very likely that each one of them will get picked off one by one as they go through the door. Because what's the natural thing? If you're like, I have to walk into this room and there might be somebody here with a gun, you walk through the room and you stop and you look around. Well, now you're not moving. Now you're a sitting duck. And you're also cognitively, you are having to scan this whole space in front of you to
Hmm.
try to find out, okay, where's the bad guy? But the bad guy knows where you're going to be. He knows you're coming through the door. And so you're at a massive disadvantage. The reason it works is because that first guy, because of the training and the trust that they have with each other, that first guy breaks the door. He comes through the door, and his slice of the pie is midline
Hmm.
to the left. So he doesn't stop. He enters the room. He keeps moving. He cuts from the center and cuts over to the corner. The second man behind him enters, cuts from the center, cuts to the right, and each guy in that stack has what they're supposed to do. But the thing is, they have to trust each other, and they can't fail to cut the part of the pie that they're
Hmm.
supposed to cut. So if the point guy comes through the door and out of his peripheral, he sees there's somebody over here that's not in his slice of the pie, he needs to still clear his part of the, he needs to still keep moving. He has to trust his second to cut the appropriate and to get
Hmm.
that guy, which
Yeah.
goes so against every bit
Hmm.
of your sort of hardwiring, because they're like, oh, I see a dude, I want to handle that. But then if you handle that and there's another guy over here, now you're getting popped and the whole thing is screwed. And this all seems so crazy, but this is why when you'll see how successful these trained groups are against a group of whatever you want to call, insurgents or whatever the preferred, or criminals in a squat context, you can have a whole lot of guys in a building and you'll see, and obviously I'm not saying that the quote unquote good guys don't take casualties, but the level of effectiveness, if you have this, whether it's this SEALs or Delta or one of these things, you can have a group of 4 guys, and obviously they have support and everything else, but that are able to go through a large structure and have this degree of effectiveness. And a lot of this is where the mythos around these kind of guys comes from. Whether it be GIGN or any of these organizations, they get this larger than life thing, and the individual dudes get this like, oh my god, like they have this thing, but their power comes from what I would say is essentially a really, really intense form of social offloading.
Yeah.
They all know how to do each other's jobs, but they don't have example. To. Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot, but
I always think of an orchestra, because there are two. Everyone has his or her specific task and only thinks about his or her task. Of course, the conductor plays an important role, but still. And together, they form what you hear. And I think that's sort of a symbol for how humans work. And social offloading is just one of those concepts where you really see how much people can work together and how the brain really attunes. And that's why I also then wanted to do an EEG experiment, because it's not just something you can see in the reaction times. It's something that you can really measure in the brain. So you can see that it's not really that well tested yet, but you can see that there are really changes in how this distractor is processed, because somehow the brain is able to just not care for that distractor anymore. I think that's really great. Even if you don't think about it, right? Because the participants, they don't know that they are offloading something, or they don't think about the advantage. It's just happening in some way. And we always talk about beehives and so on, but I think we can talk about humans. We are such a huge group that can work together in such a great way. And I think social offloading just demonstrates how much we are really attuned and how it really changes how we process information. So that is what I think is so great about this topic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it like I said, these things, it always just pops up a host of questions, because it's like, typically with these experiments, ideally even, the people don't really know what it is that they're being tested for.
That's the best case, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's always going to be certain types of people, and I think that would prove interesting in and of itself. Yeah. But it seems like, I guess, that this is sort of the default for us.
Yeah.
For us to be able to do this, and I do wonder though, because when it comes to all these things with cognition, and once again, this is my understanding of it based on my reading and such. Long time ago, you might have had stuff that led to a whole lot of problems of this sort of like essentialism, this kind of thinking. And then there was a period with the whole tabula rasa, blank slate, behaviorism, this kind of stuff, which has largely been set aside now. And to me, it's been, it seems to be the consensus for a while that like it's both. Like, yes, genetics have a role, but genes don't really do things by themselves. They do things in the presence of environmental factors.
Basically, always an interaction. That's what you hear with everything. Basically.
And so what I would, given that there does seem to be this sort of very natural, like social trust element, and not in like a really, because it seems like it's present so naturally and so young even. I'm not even saying trust in this very like conscious sense of trust, but this sort of like reflexive trust. Would you, and it sounds like maybe there's been no research done, maybe there hasn't. Would you expect that this would be something that would be possibly as sort of an ability or something that someone would be able to do would you suspect that this would be something that could be almost overridden or washed out by things like trauma? Say if
Mm-hmm.
someone had a childhood trauma where sort of their emotional sense that they could trust anyone else really with anything
Mm-hmm.
would be so damaged that, say, if that person it took this test we're talking about with like oh well, when they knew someone else was on it, now they're quicker.
Mm-hmm.
um do you think it would be possible there would be some people where you just wouldn't see that effect because just subconsciously they would not it would not occur to them based on their life
Yeah.
experiences that they could trust anyone else with anything?
And that's a great question. I actually wrote about that in my thesis as one of the future directions. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think so. I think social anxiety, for example, would be a great way to test that. I wouldn't expect there to be no social offloading. That would be a bit extreme, but probably less so. Yeah, I think so. But those are really interesting questions that you could use social offloading for, right? You can understand how people work together through this experiment. It's a really small and simple thing to do. And yeah, I think so. Maybe also I thought about racism. So
Hmm.
I guess a person that you are racist against, I think you wouldn't offload that
Hmm.
much. So that might also explain prejudice or how it works. Um, and it could also be used to measure racism, right? Because maybe you're not aware of it, but you are not offloading as much information to maybe a black
Hmm.
person. That could be true. There are already these implicit racism tests.
Hmm.
That could be another one, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of things you could test with this, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting too because it's like even in sort of anecdotal in an anecdotal sense, I mentioned earlier about the military thing, and this in no way I'm not. It's the military and such organizations. They're a group of people. You're going to have people who are racist and all the other things. Um, but it's interesting on that front where I've talked to numerous people who are vets and things like this, where they talk where that when the topic of race comes up, um, it's almost like the shared trauma in those circumstances can often sort of wash that out
Hmm.
in a way where it's like I talk to people where it's like I'm gonna mess with you've heard you've heard the expression like, oh, there's no atheists in a foxhole. I don't know if you've heard that expression, saying like
I
a
don't think so.
foxhole. Yeah. um Foxhole, like in mainly people would associate it with like Vietnam, and where you've dug into
Mm.
the ground to hide from
Okay,
artillery.
I understand.
Yeah,
I get it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
get it.
So the quippy little thing is like, oh, there's no atheists in a foxhole, meaning that when you've
Mhm.
got artillery shells and bombs raining down on you, everyone believes in God. Um,
Yeah, okay.
this is a bit extreme, obviously, but like I just thought of a way of like playing with that of like there might not be racists in a foxhole either, because the
Mhm.
shared, you know what I mean, or at least
Yeah.
not with the person you're occupying the foxhole with, because it's like the shared condition is so extreme that anything that's sort of like skin deep, you know what I mean, and which racism by definition is,
Mhm.
um, just sort of gets washed out by that. Um,
Yeah.
and so that sort of makes me think that like I said, there's obviously a physical component to it in terms of neuronal activity and things like this. But what you proposed in terms of being able to show possibly implicit bias, it also makes me wonder as well that like on the flip side of that, what could be ways to actually wash that out? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which is to
Yeah.
essentially show commonality and why those things that might lead to those biases don't actually matter. And we can look at something extreme like war where we can see instances where it's like, maybe somebody did come in with a bit of prejudice, but then through their shared and that too brings up things like and I've got you here, so it's my show, damn it. No, but do you like I said, the question popped, and we'll get back on track after this.
All right. All good.
What what is your thought on sort of the trauma bonding thing? Because it very much seems, and once again, from having been around a lot of military people, things like this, it seems to serve a very useful role,
Mhm.
but the context in which it happens is really terrible.
Mhm.
like as someone who's approaching this from sort of these things from more the psychological side of this, how do you sort of feel about that? Just the
How do I
topic
feel
of
about
trauma.
trauma bonding?
Yeah, and then the fact that it sort of is actively used in things like military training, like even things like boot camp in a lot of ways. They're not actively, hopefully, hurting, say guys that are going to boot camp or something. But a lot of that is trauma bonding. Trauma bonding. A lot of that is um, in a lot of, I mean, to put it simply, a lot of it's sort of brainwashing in a lot of ways. But it is
Maybe.
dealing with these kind of things. There's a thing that I don't know if things have changed a lot, but there used to be, maybe it still occurs if somebody who hears this is either in the military or was in recently, maybe they can tell me if this kind of thing happens still. I'm sure people have seen it in films, but there's this idea of burning the squad,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially that if you have, and if people have seen, the biggest pop culture reference I could use would be Full Metal Jacket, where Private Pyle has snuffed the donuts. He's been eating donuts in his thing, and as a result of that, everybody, like, I forget what it is. Everybody has to do X amount of push-ups, or is something along this. One person as a part of the group gets one person as part of the group makes a mistake, and then that is essentially taken out as punishment on the entirety of the rest of the group. Um, and you can kind of see what they're trying to teach with that. But I'm just going to say it. Fuck it, we ball. Do you think it's possible that something like God as a concept
Yeah.
might actually fall on this spectrum as being sort of a construct that, I'm not saying it works in the same exact way as it would with other people, but it is
Mm-hmm.
essentially this, because I've in the past, I've called God like a human basket for cares and concerns,
Mm-hmm.
of essentially imagining God just conceptually as this. And to be clear, I'm an atheist. So when I talk about God, it's not on the table for me by definition that, okay, this is a real entity or thing that exists outside of humans. I'm obviously carrying my metaphysics, such as they are, to this of not being on the table for me that this is like a real thing. So just to make that clear up front. From that perspective, though, do you think you could make an argument that it's possible, and maybe God wouldn't be the only example of this, but of us having sort of this natural system in place, and either in the absence of other humans or other things onto which we can offload things in order to maintain a higher degree of effectiveness in the world, maybe we sort of use God as a cognitive offload, and that we specifically use God as a cognitive offload for things that we are not able to entrust to other people.
I think that that's a really great idea. I mean, you could even research that. I can even
Mm,
think of an experiment to do that. But yeah, I think so. I think we are naturally attracted to always reduce the cognitive load. And that's one of the reasons for social offloading. We are just a bit lazy. We don't want to invest that much energy into things. So yeah, I think so. It could be a thing of social offloading, of offloading of responsibility or even fear. You could think of offloading maybe the anxiety for something onto a figure like God. I think so. I mean, if you think about it, social offloading also works if nobody is there, right? So there were experiments done with just the illusion of a partner. So the
mm.
participants were told that the partner takes over the distractor, but nobody was actually there. It still worked. So for some reason, they were able to down-regulate that distractor and were indeed faster. So yeah, I can imagine that if a figure like got an idea of God, that it could work in the same way, and that it actually has advantages, and that in the same way that you can actually offload things, maybe. um I don't want to make a statement if God is real or not, but yeah, I think so. I think that that's actually a great way to think about it in some way.
Well, I mean, it's a thing,
I mean,
Yeah. What do you mean real?
yeah. I just wanted to say, of course, then God is real as a concept, concept to offload to. And if it works, then I mean, God is a real offloading repository. Maybe you
yeah.
could say it like that.
Well, and that's the thing. I do think it is relevant, and it does sort
It
of,
is.
it
It
does.
is.
Yeah, and it does sort of carry it over. Like I said, I don't even think God would be unique in that regard. It's like,
No.
it's more about, and this is just me thinking, but it's more about which sort of cares and concerns, if whether it's a piece of paper, because I try to think of these things in like a scalar way. If you have
Mm-hmm.
something like a piece of paper is an appropriate repository for a very simple care and concern, like just a single fact, a single bit of information that
Mm-hmm.
but you um and you'll need to access, but you also understand that you might forget, and so you want to offload it in that way to make sure it's available to you when and if the time comes when you should need it. When it comes to other human beings, I think a similar thing can happen. And I think we do that all the time. And to put it in the context of the God thing, you've heard the statement from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I have mixed feelings about, but that's not relevant to this. That God is an ever, and it's said sort of smugly, but in a way, I think that you could understand it this way, where of the idea that God is or God of the gaps. People are probably familiar with that God is an ever receding pocket of scientific ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Which looking at it from this perspective, um, I think that would sort of make sense, because it's like there are so many things that we used to offload onto God in terms
Mm-hmm.
of maybe explanation or predictability of our environment, that used to sort of go into this God basket, that we now, it's not that we don't necessarily offload them anymore. And I think that is what I would say I think is key to point out with that whole Neil deGrasse Tyson thing. I think that, especially for atheists like me, there could be a bit of a delusion that starts to creep in, because we could say, well, yeah, we used to offload all these things onto God, about, where does lightning come from? Like people use these examples, and well, it used to be that Zeus was hurling bolts, or however we used to think about things. Well, now we understand that this, and that, and the other. And I think that it allows us, maybe in some sense, to say, well, okay, well, we're not offloading that anymore. We understand. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, to some extent, that's true. But at the same time, I think oftentimes we've just sort of shifted our offload in ways
Yeah.
that we've shifted our offload, and we've shifted our sort of locus of confidence, because it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, yeah, anything in most stuff in physics, really, or
Mm-hmm.
even a lot of stuff in astrophysics. It's like, if you ask me certain questions about like anything dealing with astrophysics, I might generate an answer to you
Mm-hmm.
because I've heard some expert or I've read something. But if you ask me, okay, well, but why? How does that really
Yeah.
work? The fact is, I'm just regurgitating something that I heard on Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimongal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, do I have an understanding of it? Really? No.
Yeah.
And once again, I'm not saying this morally. It's not saying that like, oh well, I should have a 100% understanding of every statement that I make. Otherwise, I shouldn't say it. Would ideally, in some fantasy world, would that be the case? No, but well, maybe. But like that's not how humanity works. We are constantly offloading these things onto other humans with expertise,
Mm-hmm.
onto scientific consensus. Now, I'm not making an equivalency. I'm not saying that something like, like scientific consensus doesn't have big advantages for, say, understanding nature over just ascribing it to something like God. It's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But I think it's a mistake to suddenly tell ourselves that we're not offloading when we are still.
Yeah.
Hopefully, all that made
That
sense.
makes sense. That makes sense. Definitely. I mean, I think nowadays we are especially offloading to AI, and I
Hmm.
think that's one of the reasons why it's a negative thing too. Because of course, if you are offloading something, you reduce cognitive load in processing that information. It's great in some situations, but in other situations, you are just not learning something, and your brain is deteriorating because you're not doing the stuff yourself. And with other people, it's in natural cases most of the time. Because you can also be in a non-healthy relationship and maybe offload a bit too much. But I think that's one of the problems with AI, that we are offloading too much cognitive load, which should actually be ours and which we should be able to cope with, onto AI. And so I think that's a huge problem nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, and that was what I mentioned in the beginning of your conversation about like a place where I wanted to get your ideas. You just landed on it, because I actually have I haven't done much with it. I wrote the beginning of it, but I have a piece sitting in my blasted hellscape of a document box that's called the Great Offload.
Mm-hmm. It's a great
And
title.
yeah, and I think that's the fear, because it's like, it's not like it's a new problem with AI. I think though that it is a continuation, and you can see a place where it could end up being a huge problem, because it's like,
Mhm.
starting back to the beginning, you talked about, oh, you wrote something down on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
We've already begun this offload process
Yeah.
with Google, things
I
like this.
actually think that's one of the special things about humans, you could say, that we are the only species that is able to offload things. And it has been an incredible advantage, of course. I mean, we are offloading things onto paper. That was a great development. We were offloading things onto the wall, writing it down. We were offloading things through talking to people. That's also offloading or scaffolding. And so that's a great thing. And it has always been a great thing. But it's always dependent on what you want to preserve, I think. So that's also the way I think of AI, because I only use AI for things that I don't want to learn myself. The same way you would think of a calculator, basically. I mean, I don't really care about being able to multiply things, so I just use a calculator. But I want to be able to express myself in some way. I want to be able to write and so on. So I shouldn't offload that to an AI. So that's how I think about it. How much do I really want to offload, and where do I want that cognitive load? And I
Mhm.
think that's a good way to think about it generally.
Yeah, and I think from the philosophical angle, though, it's like, I think this has always been a concern, and it's like, because it was one of the big three, like with the Greek philosophers. Was it Plato that was averse to even writing anything down? Was it
I
Socrates
don't
or
know.
one
I
of
really don't know.
one of them was essentially spoke against essentially was kind of against writing stuff down.
I've
Maybe
heard that,
somebody.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Plato
and
would make sense.
yeah, because he was like, okay, we'll stop memorizing things. There
Mhm.
won't, things like oral tradition will start to go by the wayside. And
Yeah.
you saw when the printing press with Gutenberg and all of that, when that happened, there was another similar. If my understanding is, there was another similar sort of cultural moment where it was
Yeah.
like, okay, this is going to be a problem, because like everybody will be able to do this thing, and you had like all human things, you had a lot of moving parts that made it difficult, and I think we're in a similar moment now, because
Yeah.
there's some ways in which take it. Well, I'll say Plato. If somebody can correct me if it,
Sounds
say
right.
it was Plato that say that. We now look back at that and we're like, yeah, we don't think he was right, because we are in the privileged position of seeing all of the myriad of ways in which books and
Mhm.
being able to hand on knowledge and share knowledge in that way has been a huge sort of force multiplier for humans. But at the same time, he wasn't wrong in a way, because people don't memorize things anymore unless
Mhm.
they choose to, or just something circumstantially makes it happen. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They don't
Yeah, it
need
makes sense.
to.
It really depends on when you are living, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, the difference with AI is that it's really sort of thinking for you. Of course, when you have that functional view, then you could also maybe say that writing something down, yeah, it's a bit of a cognitive process too, but I mean, AI can do much more than writing down. I think it's a difference, because what is left? I think they can also do deliberate thought. And yeah, of course, it's always a step forward, and it's always also, in some sense, we are losing something, some ability. But
Yeah, I think the
I think
principle's the
there's a
same in
line,
this.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what's so hard about it, though, is because
Yeah,
it's like
true.
when it is an ongoing thing that's been happening maybe for millennia in principle. Because if you even whether you look at the Plato thing with like, hey, we shouldn't write stuff down, um, because then we'll lose this faculty for maybe storytelling in a certain way or memorizing things.
Yeah.
There was a concern there of like, hey, we shouldn't offload this thing because something we have now will be lost. There
Yeah.
was a similar idea with the printing press. And the
Yeah,
fact
that's true.
was, something was lost
Mhm.
potentially, but we gained something in terms of human effectiveness and also a diminishment of what many would consider to be drudgery.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With the printing press, because that's another thing. Like now, if we go and we look back at sort of pre-printing press stuff, it was a whole skill set, a whole ability to be able to write in the
Yeah.
way. Like if you look at a lot of stuff from the Catholic Church and things, and people now will show kind of funny ones where it's like the beginning of each chapter, the capital letter is huge, and there's like an actual bit of art that was done
Mhm.
with something like inside the letter. There were people who did that. That was a skill that
Yeah.
went from being a necessary skill to being something that was not as necessary. And to be clear too, this is true across the board. Another example that pops to mind is something like blade making.
Mhm.
So there are still, because they culturally care to do so, a country like Japan still has the preserved ritual of taking the black sands from the certain river mouths and turning it into using old school bloomery steel methods to make the
Nice.
tamahagane. And then there are a certain number of swordsmiths who are essentially certified to be able to make like
Mm.
genuine Japanese folded steel katanas. And then you also have like a similar line of tradition with something like bonsai scissors for
Mhm.
clipping bonsai trees. And Japan is great in a lot of ways for that because they place a huge cultural value on preserving these things.
Yeah.
But it takes a massive amount of effort, and as time has passed, that has gotten even there has gotten to be less and less and less because
Mhm.
it's not they're not doing it because they have to anymore. They're doing it because they're trying to hold on to something that's of value to them as a culture. And
Yeah.
I think the core thing is sort of the same because it's like each time you're going to give up a bit of something, and what you're getting is effectiveness and or ease.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the ease part is the one where it gets really difficult. And that's why for the AI thing, people who are more pro AI would think it would be dramatic. But I see it as this potential trap of being a great offload. Because the problem is, if you view technology, period, in principle, as a sort of offload for, I want to accomplish something in my environment, I
Mhm.
can't do it so even if that's like there's an animal over there that in the early context of there's an animal over there that I want to kill and eat.
Mhm.
Okay, so if it's something like a rabbit, or a deer or something like that, I can't physically run it down. Now maybe were there some great men that were able to run down animals early on, and this is where I always press these things back because it's like, was what we're talking about now, was that one of the differences maybe between us and say Neanderthals?
Mhm. Yeah.
Of an ability to offload these things in a different way, because like and there were physical aspects of that as well. I understand there's always a host of different things going on, But I think with tech, it's always been about us finding more and more ways to offload our, and we've done it with animals. What are horses? I want
Yeah.
to accomplish this thing in the world. I'm going to press into service, a living being as opposed to pressing, quote unquote, dead matter in the form of a spear or something. Dogs is another great. That doesn't mean it's always because this is the human story. It's so fascinating in so many ways because it's like um even in nature as well, symbiotic relationships are a thing. You know,
Yeah.
like you have
Absolutely.
a fish. I forget if it's like, is it pistol shrimp? I can't remember, but you have the fish that they're big and they eat other fish, but there's a particular breed of little fish that's like the dentist fish essentially
Mhm.
that will literally swim inside the bigger fish's mouth and pick crap out of its teeth. Well, that little fish is a fish that, you know what I mean? Like, absolutely
Mhm.
would be dinner, possibly, but they're willing to coexist. Like, so it's not, it's like a principle almost of biology in a way.
Yeah. I mean,
But
yeah, it's a continual change. And I'm not sure if you can say that something is wrong
mm,
just by being in that time right now. But it has to be somewhere, right?
mhm,
I'm while you were talking, I was trying to think also about what our future might be if we were to upload everything onto AI. Just everything. I don't know really what is left. Nothing
that's the
really.
question. That
It
is the question, is
and
what is left?
yeah, what is left? And is it valuable? I'm not sure.
Mm,
I would say it's valuable. And I wouldn't say that only because we are, being more effective and more efficient, more and more, that it's necessarily a good thing. I mean, what brings us
it,
value beside productivity? A lot of things. And I think we shouldn't offload art, for example. That's a thing I would never offload. And yeah, I mean, but again, that's a subjective thing. I'm saying that. I couldn't say that that's an objective truth, but to me, I think there is actually a line somewhere.
mm.
Even though I cannot say, well, AI is now generally completely bad. I wouldn't say that. I think it has some advantages, but I still think it wouldn't be a good idea to just let that go and keep it flowing, be more productive and more efficient, because there are just other things in life, that are more valuable than making it easier. Even if we seem to be as a species, we want to be just lazy. We are just a lazy species. That's just how we are because we just don't want to use the energy for it.
Well, and
But
that's the thing
yeah,
too, is like even that. Not, I'm not like picking at your use of the word, but that even that has a lot baked into it because it's like, well, we're naturally, lazy as a species, and it's like, yeah, but laziness biologically in the certain circumstances is a
I
good
mean,
thing
yeah, every species in a sense is lazy. Yeah, that's right. We are all doing just what we need to.
to get
Um,
by.
yeah, that's true. I
But
mean, yeah,
like you
there's
said,
this.
you
I
push it
just want to
far
say
enough,
that
there's going to
that
be a point where it becomes a
yeah.
problem, where it becomes a
I mean,
genuine problem.
I think it's a sea turtle or something. No, no, it's some sea species which they don't use their brain. Basically, they just search for a place to stay, and then they don't use their brain anymore. So I think that's
Oh,
where we are headed in some way.
oh
Um,
gosh, that's gonna kill me. Yeah, they actually, it's like, I think it's a worm what is it? What is it? I'd have to
yeah,
look
I
it
know
up.
what it is in German, but I don't know what it's called in English.
Say it in German.
I think it's some sort of Muschel.
Yeah, that doesn't help. Oh God, what is it? And I think it has the word "sea" in it in English.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's like
sea
a polyp
cucumber,
or a
I think.
worm or
Yeah,
something, isn't it? It's not a fish. It's like a polyp or a worm,
yeah, yeah,
jellyfish. It was
yeah, yeah.
something like that. And I think
Yeah,
they actually have a brain, like you said, like they have essentially
yeah. They
like
have a
a,
brain, then
and then
they
they like
use the
digest it or
brain.
something. Don't
Yeah,
they
yeah,
actually
right.
like eat it essentially when they get? They're
Yeah,
like, I found home now. Let's get rid of
yeah,
this thing.
yeah. Because
you know.
it's not valuable in itself to have a brain. It's 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 good for when you're searching something, when you need to predict stuff and react to stuff. But then why would you need it? Seashell, right? That's the one.
Um,
Um,
how do you feel about
thank you.
that? how do you feel about that for humans in general? Like, okay, so we've been talking about all of this. Do you sometimes wonder, especially as someone who's, obviously vested in psychiatry and such, do you sometimes wonder if this literally just struck me. We're talking about, oh no, AI, this offload, that's happening. It's like, what if, God, this is dark. What if sort of biologically we're already sort of like dead men walking?
Yeah, maybe we
Because
are
we
seashell. That's
and
just
like
a process, maybe.
or maybe
Yeah.
we've put so much even biologically, because I
Mhm.
have these weird, I'm curious if this ever happens to you and maybe people in chat as well. I get these weird moments the more I learn about biology, where I'll be like standing in the shower and looking down, and the more I understand about evolution and stuff, and I'll be like, what the fuck am I?
Yeah.
Like, it's very, very strange, because it's like, here I am, and we do all this philosophy, and we have these conversations like this, and it's natural. It's, once again, it's not wrong, but you sort of take yourself for granted. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And because I think cognitively we can do these amazing things, and a lot of it growing out of stuff like we're talking about, like not only our cognitive ability, but how our cognitive ability interacts with each other in a social sense, and you know what I mean. And we're here now, so obviously it's worked. But we're talking about doing more and more of this to the point where we've lost things. But I actually kind of wonder, it's like, is that the actual human story? Because I pushed it back to Plato. But could you say biologically on some level that this is just a continuation of what we are as a species? We don't have
Maybe.
fur. We don't have fur anymore. Look at our feet. Like yes. Thank you. That is so weird, RGB. Like, he just said Ish's feet reminds him of a hairy monkey. Dude, feet actively give me my feet give me a crisis every time I look at them.
Yeah,
Because
that's the
look,
thing. When you look too long at a thing,
uh-huh.
sometimes I look at my hands and I'm a bit confused why they look that weird. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know it.
yeah, yeah. You said, but feet in particular are weird,
Yeah,
because if you look at it
yeah,
from
that's true.
if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, look at most other, because we're mammals, and but we are weird. And I'm not saying we're the only ones. There's other ones, because I've made the joke before that we are like the naked mole rat of primates. Um, but human beings are strange. Like, look at
Yeah,
other primates. In terms of hair patterning, most other primates have the bulk of their hair on their back and their shoulders, but their chest tends to not have as much.
yeah,
In terms of human hair pattern, we tend to have more. But you tend to have more on our chest, not so much on our back. And then
yeah.
this, what the fuck is this? We
The
still
the
don't
thing
know
is,
exactly why.
the thing is, something that evolved doesn't necessarily have a function, right? So it
The
can
spandrel or
just
whatever.
be,
Yeah,
if it's not bad, it just stays. That's the thing,
yeah.
and
But the
that's how
feet.
we look.
I want to talk about my feet, Tim.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like most other primates that are closest, I understand we don't come from, I get it. But a lot of other primates have what we would call like hands for
Mhm.
feet.
Mhm.
But most other animals that walk on the ground walk on their toes.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the bone structure, most of the rest of them walk on their toes. And so we essentially not only kind of went from ostensibly, in terms of a common ancestor, from something that likely walked on its toes, but that then went down, became something like a hand, but then
Mhm.
went back to walking on the ground again. So then we now have what was likely more of a hand structure that, once we got out on the savannah, then morphed into walking what is more like, we call it our heel, but it's more of an elbow structure,
Mhm.
like for what
Yeah.
other animals are. Because what
Yeah.
another animal's heel is sort of like, we are a bizarre fucking creature,
Yeah.
and we're not fast. We don't have teeth and claws. We don't have natural defenses that are very good. Our previous ancestor, Homo erectus, was better with these things. They had fur. They were much stronger. Could you say that with what we're talking about, that this literally goes back to our origin as a species, that we've just been offloading and making ourselves as individuals weaker? Sorry, I'm excited.
It sounds great. I mean, I'm not a biology expert, so I don't want to say anything that's wrong. But it sounds about right. There's no teleology in evolution. I mean, it's just what
No.
survives. So that's where we are. And maybe cognitive offloading is just what survives in some way. Maybe AI is what survives. And yeah, I don't know. I that's also why I'm not sure what to say is valuable and what isn't, because again, now we are going into ethics a bit more, but it's subjective. So I think right now it just depends on what we as a society want to value, and
And it will be
I
emergent
value,
in a
yeah,
way, what we
yeah,
actually
right.
value. Yeah.
That's emergent, yeah.
Would you
So
think
yeah,
that,
I'm not
you know,
sure, but
but
offloading, laziness, and energy preserving is a survival advantage in some way, and so that's just what is happening. And maybe we are destructing ourselves.
yeah, because it seems like, and I think maybe that this is what we're driving at. It seems like if this trajectory continues, maybe humans don't become obsolete, but I would say we sort of become obsolescent in a lot of ways, where you have a real diminishment in. It's so trippy though, because like when you look at it in a biological sense, you know, we have the, we have this narrative of God of having made us in His image,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
but of us of being like we are in God's image, but we're like sort of a lesser or like a flawed version. But then it's like in a storytelling sense, it's like we're doing the same thing where we are making children in our image potentially that are like the repository of what we think we value, but in the process, something is lost.
Hmm.
And I think and this is very, very broad now and very philosophical, but it's like there is almost this, and this is a huge swing. I believe it was Sir, um, fuck, I'm drawing a blank. He's a knight. Maybe somebody in the chat can help me. He's like the head of the British, God, my brain is not working today.
Yeah, it's all thermodynamics. Redbird.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Damn, it's killing me. Anyway, I'll figure it out later. Maybe I'll put it when I post it. But someone very respectable scientist, Sir something or another, and he pretty much had said that if we find evidence of life elsewhere in the universe, he fully expects that it would be something not biological in terms of
Hmm.
evidence of life, that we would find robots
What
or,
isn't biological though?
well, yeah, that's that's another question. But essentially something that was be like a repository or a record or even something active like an AI, but that was not that could exist for long stretches of time. Because that's the thing. When we talk about things like space travel, we're like the limiting factor is like human lifespans and trying to talk, you know, and in science fiction we play with these things like, oh well, we'll freeze us until we get on planet, and you know, movies like Interstellar, and then time itself gets weird, and you know, there's all these different things. But this whole thing sort of brings to mind where it's like you do wonder when intelligence shows up.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it tends to, in a broad aspect, follow this sort of trajectory where it shows up in a biological organism, but if that is left unattended, is it eventually going to hop to
Yeah,
something
good
else?
question. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Which
Sounds
sucks in a way
reasonable.
because it's like it gives this inevitable feeling to it, you know. And
Yeah.
you and I do wonder though, because I think it's easy to get sort of trapped into very extreme narratives of doom and gloom or destiny or things like this. And I think the moment we're in right now, the question is, um, it seems pretty unavoidable that maybe the offload isn't as complete as maybe what you and I might be concerned about. But the question is, if we do lose, whether it's things like labor or, you know, there's a whole host of things to talk about. If we do end up losing what we consider now to be
Mm-hmm.
very human not only sources of concern, but also sources of satisfaction. And I think things like work, that can get tough there, because it's
Yeah,
like, oh, well, people are losing their jobs. And it's like, well, yeah, but even people who have jobs that they hate, there is still a certain sense of orientation, and maybe it's not a great fulfillment, but there's still
yeah,
even if someone has a job that they hate and that they would rather be doing something else, I think it's naive to say that if you just rip that away from them, that doesn't have any sort of psychological, and that's not
yeah,
even to deal with paying for your expenses and stuff.
yeah. I mean,
That
I
what
think
do we
one
care
part.
about now? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one part of AI is that in some cases, it's not bad if labor is taken over by AI. Even if a person wouldn't have a job, maybe she finds another job. I think the problem is that in our system, it doesn't work
Mm.
because people won't find another job and AI will just be more cheap. And so people won't find anything else. And that's a problem. I think in the perfect society, AI that would be used for labor isn't a problem, but in our current society, it's definitely a problem. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Well, it's getting from, and that's the thing is it, and it's a huge collective action problem as well,
Yeah.
which we tend to not be. Case in point, you're sweating your ass off right now. You
No,
know what I
it's
mean?
actually okay. I'm just
Yeah.
having ADHD. That's why I'm doing
No.
stuff.
No, you're good. But it's like we're bad at collective action problems in general. So it's like,
Mhm.
you know, maybe the accelerationist types, maybe they're right in that, like, oh yeah, this would be really great if we can get to this place. But
Mhm.
there's so many steps in between there. And that's the thing too, is like, yeah, I don't know how you navigate it. It's like, I think
It's
you
hard.
sort of, yeah, you sort of need, and a great example being global warming or any of these things.
Mm.
You need a really high level of buy-in from the public for
Yeah.
whatever measures you want to take to try to solve the problem.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying it's impossible, but man, I'm not really sure if that's on the table. And so I'm very
Mm.
curious as we progress into this next era, what that's going to end up looking like.
We are definitely at a critical point, and as I see it, I think society doesn't want the current development to go further. I think most people don't want AI to do the stuff it's already doing, but we'll see. I mean, people all
I,
over the world don't really have to say that much anymore, sadly. Um, but I think most people actually do not like what is happening at all.
yeah, yeah, and that's the thing, though. That's where I think where it gets difficult, though, is sort of the whole like tech, and not to get political about it, but like the techno feudalism idea, where it's like public sentiment is necessary and is relevant, but it isn't equally relevant in all systems
No. Yeah,
because yeah,
yeah, I think that's. Also don't want to get too political now, but yeah, I think we're not. Maybe still a bit, but in the future, definitely not living under capitalism anymore. I think, yeah, as you said, I think it's techno feudalism in some sense. Um, because what people want to buy and what people sell is just not the same thing anymore. There are monopolies that are uncontrollable, and there's no real competition anymore anywhere. And I think that's the same case for AI. It's just probably will work together with the government, with the US government, and the whatever China and so on. And so I hope we get in control, but it's not looking good right now. Let's say it
no,
like that.
Man, because this is kind of challenging me now, where it's like I'm pretty, not that I have some big broad reach, but like I'm pretty vocal, particularly against generative AI in terms of people using it for and passing it off as their own work for art and things like this. Um, and I think you're right. I think the public
Oh,
sentiment, I think broad
battery.
oh, and you're
My battery's gone. You just have to talk like that now. Sorry.
oh no, you're fine. And we can start to move towards wrapping up here in a sec. But I think it's one thing to point out that there's a potential problem, and I think it's necessary for us now, particularly as it seems like technologically the speed of progress seems to be getting faster. I think it is good that maybe a lot of people are being like, hey, we don't really know if we want this future that a lot of these sort of more accelerationist types are painting.
Yeah.
I think my concern though is that what the technology does offer on the plus side is so compelling that it is just going to be a matter of time. And once again, it's that A to B um just that A to B section that is going to be so difficult to navigate.
Mm.
And I think the other thing that worries me is, we already, ideally how powerful these things theoretically could be moving into the future. We would be able to provide a much more sort of equal standard of living, hopefully for people across the world. But my fear is that while I'm happy to see that people are like, hey, let's pump the brakes a bit, that
Hmm.
there's going to be, whether it's because of culturally or because of collective action, there's going to be actors, whether they end up being countries or smaller groups, that do end up just saying, no, fuck that, we're putting the pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
And they either end up ruining everything for everyone, or they get so far out in front that
Mm.
they then are able to exert a just disproportionate amount of influence on everyone else. And I'm concerned that we end up with some new version of essentially mutually assured destruction.
Mm.
And I'm not sure how many of those we can keep stacking before just sort of almost like Bayesian shit kicks in, where like
Yeah.
it's just a matter of time.
Mm.
And I think that's
Yeah.
my big fear, and this is a theme, honestly. If I can, maybe I'll try to start to pull it together. Like, this is a theme, and I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Hmm.
Because I've said numerous times through this about not sort of moralizing these things, but I think it goes even further than that. I think it goes to what for me is this realization that, like, when it comes to tech and even to just learning things about the world, we need to be better, I think, about, and maybe conversations like this are a part of that, about trying to understand what it is that we're doing,
Hmm.
and um not get so carried away where we don't give any consideration to sort of like the third and like fourth order possible effects of some of these decisions that we make. Just sort of philosophically, how does that land to you with you? Like, do you think that that's well, I don't want to sort of load your answer at all. How does that land with you?
Actually, I would end politically, a bit more politically. I think for that development to be good in the end, we have to step back. I think we have to reevaluate what we actually want to value in our life. And maybe that's also a point about what I'm talking about when I'm writing about Adorno, for example. Maybe you have read that piece. I think we are too much focused nowadays on productivity. And I think most people can't really step outside that view that everything needs to be more efficient, that you need to offload X thing, that you need to offload that thing, and so on. I just think we have to think about what we really want to do, and that we need to value happiness and our relations and art, maybe even, over just making it faster and making it more efficient. I think that should be the next step. And I think that's the next step for a lot of things, that we just maybe should think about the system we are living in, because I don't think we'll get out of this if we are just continuing trying to be more efficient in that way or in another way. I think we have to question where we actually want to be headed.
Yeah, yeah, I 100%. Yeah, I really don't think I could agree with that more. And you know what? It's funny because I've had people, and you see some people sometimes ask in a scornful way, I think as a result of exactly what you're saying, where they'll be like, and don't get me wrong, there's parts of philosophy that are completely up their own ass, and what have you. But I think people tend to approach philosophy with this thing about like, oh well, what is it good for? How do I use
Yeah.
this? And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that explains the popularity of things like Stoicism. There's certain types of philosophy that are very much focused on How do I do better? How do I live better?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like you said, when we're so focused on efficiency, optimization, I think you wrote that other thing about like self-optimization being almost like
Impression. Yeah.
destruction or abuse.
Yeah.
Like you get so wrapped up in the doing that you just never stop to ask, what the fuck is it for?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And I
think
think,
that's the thing.
yeah, I think that is where the role of philosophy does come
Yeah.
in, because that's another example, I think, where, as you know, I call myself a philosopher or whatever, but like, as people who are interested in this, yeah, I think that's a takeaway that I'll take from this. Is that, you know, people will ask like, oh, well, what good is philosophy? What's it for? And I think
Yeah.
oftentimes we sort of fall into the trap of being like, wanting to sell it in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's like, oh, well, here's how philosophy can help you be more productive and there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
hate that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and once again, it's not wrong,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and
That's
it's not that
true.
that's like an illegitimate use of philosophy, but it's like, if that's not, and to be clear, if that's the type of philosophy that you're genuinely passionate about, whether it's like stoicism or broicism or whatever, man, like you do you, that's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to survive. But I think for me, it's like I think I kind of reject the premise of the question about, no, this is a more fundamental thing. The thing that
Yeah.
you're concerned with about, oh, well, how do I do better, be better, optimize, all this kind of stuff, that is meaningless if it's not for anything,
That's
or
true.
if you if you know what it's for
Yeah.
yourself personally, that's fine. But I think
Mm-hmm.
so many of us don't. Like, it says
Yeah.
optimize. How do I got my routine in the mornings and all this other kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but yeah, what's it for?
Yeah.
Are you happy?
That's
You
a problem.
know.
Yeah. I don't think that productivity is a problem in itself. I mean, I do it myself sometimes. But the thing is, if that's the goal you have, if the goal is just to be efficient and productive and maybe optimizing, offloading stuff, then that's not a good thing, because you could be productive, but you need to have a goal that's higher than making money or something. And I know that now goes back to Aristotle even, but I think you should think about what you really value before you think about where you want to be productive or where you want to offload things.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. But this has been fantastic, man. I'm so glad we
I
got
think so too. I
yeah.
think so too.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got to do this. We kind of talked about it for a minute, and I'm glad we put it together. And obviously, I'd love to talk again sometime. Like I said, this particular topic was a bit back in your
Me
a
too,
bit
man.
yeah, a bit back in your writing, and I was just scrolling through some of your stuff before we got on here again, and God, you got so many. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass because I happen to be talking to you. I'm always so incredibly impressed with your work. And
Thank you,
you're a much
man.
bigger account than I am at this point. So probably, if I had to guess, a good percentage of the people listening right now are from your side of the fence. But absolutely, if any of you are here from my side of things and you're not subscribed to Tim, you know, the fuck are you doing? Go click the button.
Thanks, man. I can only say the same thing about you. I really enjoy your text. I mean, I also said it a lot of times. I think your writings are one of my favorite writings actually on Substack.
Oh,
Just the way you write, and I also can just say, please subscribe to Ishmael. It's really always a pleasure to read.
yeah. Thank you so much. Nope. Don't expect it to be anything like Tim's stuff, though. I'll put a warning out there, because
Depends
if
on
on
what
the
you
back of
value,
this
though.
conversation, there's overlap. There's certainly overlap. But if off the back of this you're like, oh, cool, he's a philosophy writer, it's like, sometimes. But be prepared to get some weird shit in your inbox. So but no, this has been a blast, Tim, and thank you so much. And I'm glad we didn't run into anything catastrophic technologically, but
Next time
we
I'll
had to
just
deal
use
with.
my laptop, then nothing will stop working, hopefully.
Yeah.
And yes, somebody wrote in the chat, we'll do a part 2. At least from
Yeah.
my side, we'll do a part 2. Part 3 maybe even.
Part 67 of the ongoing.
Ishmael
but
will
no.
will return in Avengers Endgame.
Yeah. You get the whole clan together. Yeah, that's what they need to
Yeah.
do. Because now I think you can only have 3 people. We'll
Ah,
have to.
okay.
Yeah, we'll have to pressure them so we can get like everybody in. We'll get Alex,
Okay.
we'll get Ben, we'll get the whole clan in.
Yeah, we'll
But
definitely do another one.
yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much, man, and thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for joining us. And if you just came in partway through, I'll post this. I don't have a YouTube. I think Tim might, so this
I
might
have,
end up
yeah.
on YouTube as well. But yeah, I'll get the whole thing posted here soon. So anybody who just came through partway, if you enjoyed what you heard and want to hear the rest of it, here I'll get that probably posted tomorrow. And I should be posting my conversation with Tommy from a couple days ago here in a little bit. So, but thank you
Great.
everyone, and have a great night. I appreciate you all.
Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.